Most people believe manipulation is something rare, something used by villains, criminals, narcissists, or political tyrants. They imagine manipulation as a dramatic event, a calculated scheme, a sinister whisper in a dark hallway. But the truth is far more unsettling. Manipulation is woven into the fabric of human behavior. It exists in every relationship, every social structure, every family dynamic, every workplace environment, every cultural norm. Not because humans are evil, but because humans are driven by influence, by the desire to shape the world around them in ways that protect their interests, their emotions, and their sense of identity. Machiavellianism is not a personality type, is a strategy, a psychological framework, a lens through which the human power struggle becomes visible. And once you learn to see through this lens, you can never unsee it again. You start to notice the subtle pressure in a conversation. You start to detect the hidden motives behind someone's kindness. You start to see the quiet tug-of-war embedded in every interaction. You begin to understand why people behave the way they do, not as random, chaotic beings, but as strategic creatures driven by survival, emotion, insecurity, ambition, and fear. Niccolo Machiavelli himself was not the monster people imagine. He did not create manipulation, he merely exposed it. He described the human nature everyone hides, the instincts people pretend not to have. He revealed the psychology rulers use to maintain power, not by brute force, but by understanding the minds of those they governed. That is why Machiavellianism is so feared, not because it teaches harm, but because it uncovers the truth people prefer to ignore. And here is the truth most people fear the most. Every human being is influencing or being influenced at every moment. There is no neutrality in social interaction. Every word we speak, every expression we show, every silence we hold, every reaction we give, all creates shifts in the psychological balance between people. Yet most people walk through life oblivious to this reality. They think intentions are pure. They think words are honest. They think relationships are mutual. They think trust is natural. They think everyone means well. This book exists to put an end to that blindness, not to make you manipulative, but to make you immune to manipulation. Because the greatest vulnerability a person can have is ignorance. Manipulators do not succeed because they are powerful. They succeed because their targets cannot see them coming. People break under manipulation not because they are weak, but because they are unaware. You are here to become aware. To understand Machiavellian psychology, you must first understand what drives it. Machiavellian behavior does not come from joy, confidence, or inner peace. It comes from fear. It comes from insecurity. It comes from survival instincts. It comes from the belief that the world is a competitive arena, where those who fail to protect themselves are consumed by those who will. Manipulators believe they must shape the world before the world shapes them. They strike first, influence first, anticipate first, and preemptively defend their interests by understanding the desires, fears, and weaknesses of those around them. But manipulation is not only practiced by dark personalities. In fact, many people manipulate unconsciously. They learn it as children. They observe it in their environment. They inherit it from family dynamics, cultural norms, or trauma. A child who learns that emotional outbursts attract attention grows into an adult who cries to win arguments. A person who learns that silence creates guilt grows into someone who uses withdrawal as leverage. A person who feels ignored learns to exaggerate stories to gain significance. Manipulation is not always malicious. It is often a survival strategy. This is why understanding manipulation is not about demonizing others. It is about recognizing behavior patterns so you do not fall into their traps. The first foundation of Machiavellian psychology is this: people are driven more by their hidden motives than their spoken intentions. Humans rarely communicate their true desires. Instead, they cloak them behind socially acceptable narratives. Someone who wants control speaks of helping. Someone who wants validation speaks of being concerned. Someone who wants dominance speaks of protecting. Someone who wants attention speaks of sharing. Manipulation begins with language, designed to hide motives rather than reveal them. But motives are not the only hidden element. The second foundation of Machiavellian psychology is humans are predictable. If you understand someone's fears, desires, insecurities, attachment style, emotional triggers, and worldview, you can predict how they will behave in almost any situation. This does not require manipulation. It requires awareness. It requires observation. It requires emotional intelligence. A manipulator uses this predictability to control. An empowered individual uses it to protect themselves. The third foundation is the most important. Power is psychological before it is physical, social, or economic. Power is not about force. Power is not about wealth. Power is not about control. Power is about perception. If people perceive you as strong, they treat you differently. If people perceive you as weak, they treat you differently. If people perceive you as someone who can be influenced, they influence you. If people perceive you as someone who cannot be manipulated, they respect your boundaries. Perception shapes interaction, and Machiavellian individuals understand this instinctively. They know how to create a presence that discourages resistance. They know how to use silence to shift power. They know how to use ambiguity to create uncertainty. They know how to use charm as a weapon. They know how to read people faster than people can read themselves. But here's the most important truth. You cannot be manipulated if you understand how manipulation works. Manipulation requires vulnerability, psychological openings left unguarded, ignorance, emotional need, unresolved insecurity, lack of self-awareness, desperation for approval, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of loneliness. The Machiavellian mind exploits these vulnerabilities. Not because the manipulator is powerful, but because the target has unprotected emotional territory. That is why understanding dark psychology is not about learning to control others. It is about learning to control yourself so others cannot. Humans who lack self-mastery become slaves to those who understand their internal landscape. That is the essence of Machiavellian power, not dominance, but awareness. To truly grasp Machiavellian psychology, you must study not only the manipulator, but the manipulated. You must understand why people fall for charm, why they obey pressure, why they trust lies, why they ignore red flags, why they cling to toxic relationships, why they believe false narratives, why they give second chances, why they fear walking away. Manipulators succeed because most people are driven by emotion, not logic. They chase approval. They crave belonging. They fear conflict. They avoid discomfort. They attach quickly. They forgive easily. They blame themselves. They doubt their instincts. They prioritize harmony over. These traits make them vulnerable not because they are weak, but because they are human. Part of becoming immune to manipulation is learning to understand your own psychology with the same clarity a Machiavellian strategist would. You must know your own emotional triggers. You must know your own unresolved wounds. You must know your own insecurities. You must know your own biases. You must know your own patterns. If you do not, someone else will use them against you. Manipulation does not occur because someone has power over you. It occurs because someone sees what you cannot see about yourself. This chapter is not about fear. It is about clarity. It is about understanding the psychology beneath the surface of every conversation, every relationship, every interaction. Because the truth is this: power dynamics shape every part of human life. Influence determines outcomes. Perception shapes reality. Psychology drives behavior. You do not need to become manipulative. You need to become Inaman. I-P-U-L-A. Be a lead by the time you finish this book. You will no longer be someone who gets blindsided by hidden motives. You will no longer be someone who gives people the benefit of the doubt at your own expense. You will no longer be someone who misses the early warning signs. You will no longer be someone who is emotionally controlled by those who understand your psychology better than you do. You are here to understand the dark side of influence, not to use it, but to defeat it. And the journey begins now. Most people think manipulation is loud. They imagine a villain barking orders, a tyrant issuing threats, or a toxic person screaming to get their way. But real control is rarely loud. Real manipulation is silent, subtle, invisible. It hides in tone, timing, suggestion, implication, and emotional triggers. It operates beneath conscious awareness, shaping decisions long before people notice they've been influenced. True Machiavellian control is not about forcing someone to obey. It's about leading them into choosing what you wanted all along. To understand the architecture of manipulation, you first must understand the structure of the human mind itself. Influence works because the mind has predictable circuit patterns that can be studied, anticipated, and affected. Manipulators do not overpower the mind. They use the mind against itself. They exploit human psychology in the same way a hacker exploits a computer, by understanding the system better than the system understands itself. And here's the first truth you must never forget. The human mind is not designed to see reality. It is designed to interpret reality. Interpretations can be influenced. Interpretations can be shaped. Interpretations can be rewritten. Machiavellian influence begins where perception begins, long before logic, long before conscious reasoning, long before awareness. The architecture of control is built around one goal: to enter someone's decision-making process before they realize a decision is being made. This is the core of psychological power. This is the essence of Machiavellian influence. And this is what you must understand to protect yourself. The first pillar of control, selective aria-wise, the world is too complex for the mind to process in full detail. So the brain simplifies, it filters, it selects, it discards. Most of what you see is not what is there, it is what your brain decided was important. Manipulators do not change reality. They change what you pay attention to. A single detail emphasized correctly can alter your entire perception. A single omission, hidden strategically, can distort your conclusions. A single suggestion, planted subtly, can guide you toward a decision that feels like your own. Selective reality is the silent doorway into the mind. A skilled manipulator doesn't need to lie. All they need to do is direct your focus, because where your attention goes, your logic follows. The second pillar of control, emotional TRGGRs, humans, are not rational creatures who feel. They are emotional creatures who rationalize. This is the central vulnerability of the mind. Manipulators understand this instinctively. They know fear overrides logic, desire overrides caution, guilt overrides boundaries, shame overrides self-respect, hope overrides skepticism, loneliness overrides intuition. The mind is most easily controlled when it is emotionally charged. This does not require aggression. It is often disguised as comfort, empathy, attraction, concern. A Machiavellian manipulator does not seek to overpower your emotions. They seek to predict them. Once they understand your emotional wiring, they can guide your reactions like a puppeteer guides strings, not by force, it's by expectation. They know exactly which emotion will open which. It's a psychological door. And once a manipulator finds the key emotion that shapes you, the rest becomes simple. The third pillar of control, cognitive fatigue, tired mind, is a vulnerable mind. This fatigue does not need to be physical. It can be emotional exhaustion, information overload, social pressure, or anxiety. When the mind is tired, it stops asking questions. It stops analyzing. It stops resisting, defaults to compliance. Manipulators understand this and often create conditions where the target becomes overwhelmed just enough to surrender. This is why many toxic individuals create cycles of chaos followed by peace. It is not accidental, it is strategic. Chaos weakens, peace rewards. Together they build dependency, because once someone is mentally tired, even bad decisions feel easier than resisting. The fourth pillar of control, MBIG, EIT. Most people assume clarity is powerful, but Machiavellian strategists understand that ambiguity is far more effective. Ambiguity creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates anxiety. Anxiety makes people seek guidance. Guidance gives the manipulator authority. the less someone knows what you truly want, the more they try to interpret your actions. And interpretation always benefits the one who stays silent. This is why real manipulators rarely reveal their full intentions. They allow people to guess in people, almost always guess incorrectly. Silence is not passive. Silence is strategy. The less the world knows about your motives, the more control you possess. The fifth pillar of control. Social PR. If the mind follows the herd long before it follows logic. Humans evolve to conform, not to rebel. Manipulators use this instinct by creating impressions of consensus. They imply that others agree. They mention imaginary supporters. They hint at group approval. They reference authority. Nothing persuades the mind faster than the belief that everyone else thinks so too. This is why propaganda works. This is why toxic people isolate their targets. This is why abusers convince victims that no one else will care. This is why influencers leverage testimonials. This is why cults thrive on unity. Social proof is one of the most powerful psychological weapons in existence. Once someone believes the group approves, they rarely resist. The sixth pillar of control. Social POSITO and adage. Every relationship romantic. Professional. Social contains a hidden hierarchy. Manipulators do not need to sit at the top. They only need you to believe you sit below them. Perceived superiority is enough. This is achieved through confidence, mystery, emotional detachment. Scarcity, strategic silence, knowledge authority, signals intellectual dominance, the Machiavellian. Individual creates an Oran atmosphere that shifts the psychological gravity in their favor. People begin acting differently around them, often without realizing why. Because when you feel someone is above you, you behave as if they are. The seventh pillar of control. The rule of CRICIT. Why people want what they cannot have. Scarcity increases value. Uncertainty increases desire. Distance increases obsession. Manipulators use scarcity by withdrawing attention, limiting access. Creating emotional unpredictability, offering partial approval, staying mysterious, making themselves appear in demands. Scarcity makes people chase. Chasing blinds the mind. A blinded mind is easy to influence. This is why toxic people withdraw affection at strategic moments. It is not neglect, it is leverage. The eighth pillar of control. Consistency CIO. MITMI. MIT humans crave internal consistency. Once they decide something, they stick to it even if the decision was manipulated into existence. Manipulators use this by creating small yes steps. They guide someone into agreeing with something minor, then escalate slowly. This technique is subtle, invisible, and alarmingly effective. By the time the target realizes they've gone too far, they've already justified their earlier decisions and feel psychologically locked in. This is not magic. This is human psychology functioning exactly as designed. The ninth pillar. OF control. Identity MAONTON. This is the deepest layer of control and the most dangerous. If a manipulator can influence your identity, they can influence every decision that identity makes. Identity is the core of behavior. If you believe, you are loyal, you are forgiving, you are patient, you are responsible, you are self-sacrificing. You are attached, you are the strong one. A manipulator only needs to weaponize that belief. This is why manipulators often say things like, "I thought you cared. I thought you were different. You're not the person I believed you were. I expected more from you. You're better than this." It is not persuasion. It is identity exploitation. If they can rewrite who you think you are, they can control what you think you must do. The 10th pillar of control. WITHHOLDHO. Withholding is more powerful than giving. Withholding creates desire, confusion, anxiety, dependency, emotional pursuit, self-doubt. A manipulator withholds validation, clarity, affection, attention, approval, closure, praises. Weapon is brutal because the mind interprets lack as fault. If I were better, they would give me what I need. This is how self-blame forms. This is how emotional dependency forms. This is how psychological control forms. Manipulators do not overpower their targets. They starve them. And hunger makes the mind easy to direct. the 11th pillar of control. The timing of influence is more powerful than the influence itself. A manipulator waits for vulnerability, exhaustion, stress, doubt, emotional instability, loneliness, overconfidence, crisis. Then they strike with precision. The same message at the wrong time is useless. The same message at the right time is transformative. Timing is the scalpel of Machiavellian strategy. It's not force, it's a finesse. The 12th pillar of control, reciprocity, PRS, sutra humans hate feeling indebted. Manipulators use this instinct by offering help, compliments, gifts, favors, attention, empathy, supportive in. When the gesture is small, the psychological debt is heavy. Once someone feels they owe a manipulator, they become compliant. They justify things they shouldn't. They accept things they normally wouldn't. They tolerate things they once believed were unacceptable. This is not kindness. It is currency. The 13th pillar of control. The framing EFFECT. A something is framed determines how it is understood. Manipulators frame situations to make themselves look justified, the target look unreasonable, the alternatives seem impossible. The decision feel urgent, the conflicts seem mutual, the problem appear external. Every human being, no matter how intelligent, disciplined, or experienced, has emotional weak points. These weak points are not flaws. They are simply the exposed wiring of the human psyche. Machiavellian individuals do not break people with force. They break them by locating these emotional wires and pulling them one by one until the target bends. Not because they are weak, but because they are human, to become immune to manipulation. You must first understand your own emotional architecture. You must learn where your mind is vulnerable, where your heart is exposed, and where your identity is easily shaped. Machiavellian individuals are not powerful because they are brilliant. They are powerful because others are unaware of their own psychological openings. Manipulation begins where self-awareness ends. And so, this part of the book is not about the manipulator. It is about your mind, your patterns, your emotional habits, your inner circuitry. Because immunity begins with introspection, the first emotional weak point is the need to be understood. Humans are social beings. They want connection, resonance, someone who listens deeply and responds with the right words. They want to feel seen. They want to feel validated. A Machiavellian thinker understands this instinct and often begins manipulation by offering perfect emotional mirroring. They listen intensely. They respond with precision. They reflect your thoughts back to you with a clarity that feels comforting. They create the illusion of profound emotional alignment. This alignment is not genuine empathy, it is strategic empathy. It creates rapid trust, accelerated intimacy, and psychological openness. You begin lowering your defenses not because they earned it, but because they mirrored it. The second emotional weak point is the fear of being abandoned. People rarely admit this fear out loud, but internally it shapes much of their behavior. Abandonment does not always mean someone walking away. It can be the loss of attention, the withdrawal of affection, the absence of consistency. Manipulators understand that the threat of absence often controls the mind more effectively than the presence of force. They know that subtle distance can trigger panic in people who fear loss. This fear is not weakness, it is biology. Humans evolved in tribes. To be abandoned meant death. That instinct persists today. Machiavellian individuals exploit it by creating emotional inconsistency. They give warmth, then withdraw it. They offer attention, then remove it. They build closeness only to pull away at critical moments. The mind becomes addicted to the return of their approval. The third emotional weak point is the desire for approval. Approval is one of the most powerful psychological reinforcers in existence. It is the foundation of childhood, the language of praise, the engine of self-worth. People want to be accepted, liked, respected, validated. A Machiavellian manipulator learns very quickly what type of approval you crave: intellectual, emotional, physical, social, or moral. Once they discover it, they weaponize it. They offer approval only when it benefits them, and withhold it when they want control. This creates a loop where you work harder for their Validation without realizing you have entered a behavioral trap. The fourth emotional weak point is guilt. Guilt is one of the most common tools used in manipulation. It works because people fear being seen as selfish, irresponsible, or uncaring. Manipulators use guilt to force compliance. They frame themselves as victims. They present you as the cause of their pain. They remind you of what they've done for you. They imply you owe them something. They twist responsibility until you feel obligated to act against your own interests. People who have strong empathy or a desire to be good are especially vulnerable. Guilt is powerful because it makes you believe you are doing the right thing while you are being controlled. The fifth emotional weak point is shame. Shame is deeper than guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. Manipulators use shame to attack identity. They belittle subtly. They undermine confidence. They question character. They compare you unfavorably. Shame destabilizes a person at their core. It creates insecurity, self-doubt, and a desperate desire to regain approval. The dangerous part is that shame does not require direct insults. It can be delivered through tone, silence, sarcasm, or disappointment. Shame reshapes self-perception, and a reshaped self-perception leads to compliant behavior. The sixth emotional weak point is the longing for closure. Humans need answers. They hate unresolved emotions. They crave explanations. A manipulator weaponizes ambiguity by denying clarity. They avoid accountability. They stay vague. They answer questions with more uncertainty. This lack of closure keeps you emotionally invested, mentally occupied, and psychologically dependent. The mind loops endlessly, searching for meaning that will never come. The manipulator does not withhold closure by accident. They withhold it to maintain power. The seventh emotional weak point is fear of conflict. Many people avoid confrontation at all costs. They fear tension, discomfort, anger, or emotional escalation. Machiavellian individuals take advantage of this by creating high-conflict environments. They criticize suddenly. They escalate minor issues. They provoke emotional reactions. They shift blame. They raise their voice. They create chaos, because chaos causes people who fear conflict to retreat, apologize, or compromise prematurely. The manipulator wins not because they are stronger, but because the target is conflict-averse. The eighth emotional weak point is loneliness. Loneliness is one of the most powerful psychological vulnerabilities. When people feel lonely, they accept treatment they would never tolerate otherwise. They overlook red flags. They cling to anyone who gives them attention. They confuse connection with safety. Manipulators identify loneliness quickly through silence, body language, self-doubt, or oversharing. They become the temporary source of companionship, then weaponize that connection to control. Loneliness is not a weakness, it is a human need. But when unmet, it opens the door to psychological influence. The ninth emotional weak point is hope. Hope is beautiful, but it can also be dangerous. People who hope for change stay too long in situations that are destroying them. They believe promises. They ignore patterns. They romanticize potential. Manipulators exploit hope by offering a better future they never intend to deliver. They apologize dramatically. They promise improvement. They change temporarily. They paint visions of who they could be. But these are illusions crafted to keep you invested. Hope is the rope that pulls you back into the cycle. The 10th emotional weak point is betrayed intuition. People often feel when something is wrong long before they can explain it. Intuition is not mystical, it is subconscious pattern recognition. But manipulators undermine your intuition by shifting blame, reframing events, or suggesting you're overthinking. The more you doubt your instincts, the easier you are to control. This is how people lose themselves. Not because their intuition failed, but because they were convinced not to listen to it. The 11th emotional weak point is identity attachment. If someone ties manipulation to your identity, you become easy to control. If you believe you are loyal, they demand loyalty. If you believe you are forgiving, they demand forgiveness. If you believe you are helpful, they demand help. Identity is the deepest layer of self. Once someone weaponizes identity, they no longer need persuasion. You manipulate yourself for them. The 12th emotional weak point is fear of judgment. People fear looking bad. They fear criticism. They fear being misunderstood. Manipulators use this by threatening social disapproval. Subtly, not overtly. They imply you are overreacting. They suggest others think poorly of you. They paint you as unreasonable or dramatic. The fear of judgment forces people to shrink, withdraw, or comply. The 13th emotional weak point is emotional exhaustion. When people are drained, they become compliant. Manipulators understand this and use cycles of intensity to weaken mental resistance. When you are tired enough, you will accept anything just to end the conflict. People think they gave up because they are weak. No, they gave up because they were drained. The 14th emotional weak point is attachment trauma. People who grew up with inconsistent affection become especially vulnerable to manipulative cycles. They crave closeness, fear abandonment, and feel responsible for emotional conflict. Machiavellian individuals do not create this trauma, they simply activate it, not by accident. By instinct. The 15th emotional weak point is the desire to be the bigger person. This trait is viewed as noble, but it makes people predictable. Manipulators exploit this by forcing you into the role of caretaker, fixer, forgiver, or stabilizer. They know you will avoid escalation. They know you will absorb blame. They know you will attempt to repair the relationship. And so they continue pushing because your desire to be virtuous makes you controllable. The 16th emotional weak point is hero syndrome, the desire to save, repair, or heal others. People with this trait are drawn to broken individuals. They feel needed. They feel important. But manipulators exploit this by presenting themselves as wounded, misunderstood, or damaged. They use vulnerability as bait. And once you invest emotionally, you become entangled. Asterisk, the 17th emotional weak point is self-blame. People who are quick to blame themselves accept responsibility even when they are not at fault. Manipulators love these individuals because they never need to apologize. Most people walk through life assuming everyone they meet is exactly who they present themselves to be. They believe the mask is the person, the tone is the truth, the words are sincere, and the emotions expressed are genuine. They evaluate others at face value, unaware that human interaction is a theater, and every social environment is a stage. Machiavellian individuals understand this instinctively. They do not show who they are. They show who you need them to be. This is not deception in the cartoonish sense. It is strategic presentation. It is psychological camouflage. It is the art of blending into your expectations so perfectly that you never question what lies behind the curtain. The most dangerous manipulators are not the loud, aggressive, chaotic ones. They are the quiet ones, the gracious ones, the charming ones, the self-controlled ones, the ones who make you feel comfortable while slowly rearranging the emotional furniture inside your mind. To understand Machiavellian psychology, you must understand social masks, why humans wear them, how they work, and why manipulators are masters at switching them depending on what the moment demands. The first social mask is the mask of charm. Charm is not kindness. Kindness is sincere. Charm is strategic. Charm is calculated warmth, applied selectively to disarm suspicion and accelerate trust. A Machiavellian individual studies body language, tone, energy, and responsiveness. They mirror your posture, match your enthusiasm, echo your phrases. They create resonance. The charm they offer is not random, it is tailored to your emotional needs. If you crave validation, they flatter. If you crave understanding, they listen. If you crave attention, they focus. Charm is the bait that makes manipulation feel like affection. The second social mask is the mask of innocence. This mask is used when the manipulator wants to appear incapable of wrongdoing. They present themselves as harmless, pure, misunderstood, or victimized. They speak softly. They act naive. They pretend confusion. they feign vulnerability. The purpose of this mask is to remove suspicion. Innocent people cannot be manipulative. Innocent people cannot be dangerous. Innocent people cannot be questioned. This mask is one of the most effective because it plays on a universal human instinct, the desire to protect the vulnerable. But in the hands of a Machiavellian mind, innocence becomes a shield and a weapon. The third social mask is the mask of competence. People trust competence. They trust those who appear capable, knowledgeable, and confident. Manipulators understand this, so they cultivate an aura of authority. They speak with certainty even when they are wrong. They present opinions as facts. They use complex language to create intellectual distance. They avoid admitting ignorance. Competence creates credibility, and credibility creates influence. When someone believes you are intelligent, they stop questioning your motives. The fourth social mask is the mask of empathy. This mask is the most dangerous because it is the easiest to fake and the hardest to expose. Empathy is a powerful bonding tool. It bypasses logic and forms emotional intimacy quickly. Machiavellian individuals do not feel empathy the way emotionally healthy people do, but they can mimic it flawlessly. They use soft tone, deep eye contact, thoughtful nods, and emotionally charged phrases. They reveal just enough vulnerability to appear relatable. They listen attentively, not to understand, but to gather information. Their empathy is not emotional, it is strategic. It builds attachment, dependence, and trust. Once emotional connection is formed, logic becomes secondary. The fifth social mask is the mask of chaos. Chaos is another strategic tool. When manipulators want to destabilize you, they act unpredictable, volatile, or emotionally explosive. This mask is designed to put you on edge. When someone is chaotic, you cannot anticipate their next move. This unpredictability creates psychological instability. You start walking on eggshells. You become overly cautious. You seek peace at any cost. This makes you easier to control. Chaos is a mask used to exhaust you, not to express emotion. The sixth social mask is the mask of stability. Ironically, manipulative individuals often appear extremely stable when they want to attract trust. They project composure, calmness, and emotional control. They appear secure, solid, reliable. This creates the illusion of safety. People open up to those who seem stable. They reveal secrets. They share insecurities. But this stability is not genuine. It is a performance. Once trust is established, the mask can be removed at any time. The seventh social mask is the mask of agreement. This mask is used to lower defenses. Manipulators nod, agree, and validate everything you say. They align with your perspective, values, opinions, and stories. Agreement creates psychological harmony. It makes you feel understood. It activates oxytocin and lowers suspicion. People trust those who seem similar to them. This similarity is not real, it is engineered. The eighth social mask is the mask of humility. This mask is used to appear harmless, non-threatening, or morally superior. Manipulators minimize their accomplishments. They downplay their knowledge. They pretend to be simple, ordinary, or inexperienced. This lowers your guard. You underestimate them. You feel safe around them. Humility is powerful because it contradicts your image of a manipulator. But humility, when used strategically, is simply another layer of camouflage. The ninth social mask is the mask of outrage. This mask appears when manipulators want to control through intimidation. They use sudden anger, accusations, indignation, or moral fury. Outrage is a distraction. It shifts focus away from the real issue and places you on the defensive. Most people crumble in the face of intense emotion. They concede simply to restore calm. Manipulators use outrage selectively, never too often, never without purpose. It is not emotion. It is a tactic. The 10th social mask is the mask of victimhood. This mask is one of the most commonly used. Manipulators portray themselves as injured, betrayed, mistreated, or misunderstood. Victimhood is powerful because it grants moral authority. The person seen as a victim is rarely questioned. They receive sympathy. They escape accountability. They manipulate guilt effortlessly. When a manipulator uses victimhood, they shift blame, rewrite history, and draw people into their emotional narrative. Victimhood is not always fabricated. Sometimes it is exaggerated, but the purpose is always the same: control. The 11th social mask is the mask of authenticity. This mask is extremely potent because authenticity is one of the most valued social traits today. Manipulators use calculated transparency, sharing flaws, insecurities, or personal stories to build connection. This creates the illusion of honesty. But this vulnerability is selective. It is offered strategically, not sincerely. When someone appears authentic, suspicion drops dramatically. People share more. They trust more. They bond faster. The 12th social mask is the mask of intellectualism. Some manipulators control by projecting superior knowledge. They overwhelm you with details, statistics, theories, or jargon. They create intellectual intimidation. When you feel unqualified to debate them, you stop resisting. You defer to their expertise. But this expertise is often exaggerated or selectively presented. The 13th social mask is the mask of moral superiority. Manipulators claim to be ethical, righteous, principled, or morally above others. This gives them psychological leverage. They frame their actions as pure and your actions as flawed. The goal is to position themselves as the moral authority in the relationship. When someone believes they are morally superior, they justify control as helping you. This mask is used to shame, guilt, or embarrass you into compliance. The 14th social mask is the mask of fragility. Some manipulators pretend to be too sensitive to handle conflict. They cry, they shut down, they withdraw. They claim to be emotionally fragile. This forces you to tiptoe around them. You avoid discussions that might upset them. You suppress your needs. You take responsibility for their emotions. Fragility becomes a cage one that traps you through compassion. The 15th social mask is the mask of confidence. Confidence is intoxicating. It creates authority instantly. The Machiavellian mind uses confidence as performance. They speak with certainty. They move with purpose. They maintain eye contact. They speak slowly. Confidence makes you believe they know what they're doing. But confidence is not always truth. It is often illusion. The 16th social mask is the mask of doubt. At times, manipulators pretend uncertainty, confusion, or helplessness. They ask questions they already know the answers to. They exaggerate their inexperience. This forces you to guide them. And the more you guide someone, the more invested you become. Doubt is strategic helplessness designed to shift responsibility onto you. The 17th social mask is the mask of curiosity. This mask is used to gather information. Manipulators ask deep questions not to understand, but to collect data. They appear genuinely interested in your life. They ask about your childhood, your insecurities, your past relationships, your fears, your ambitions. Every piece of information becomes a lever later. The 18th social mask is the mask of sincerity. This mask is used when manipulators need to deliver something false. They speak slowly. They use emotional tone. They hold eye contact. They repeat your name. They lean in. Sincerity is not truth. It is performance. People believe sincerity because they want to believe it. Manipulators use that desire. Power is not always loud. Power is not always aggressive. Power is not always violent. The most effective power in human psychology is not physical force. It is strategic advantage. Machiavellian thinkers do not dominate with strength. They dominate with positioning. They do not win battles. They make battles unnecessary. They do not persuade through pressure. They persuade by structuring the environment so the desired outcome becomes. The only outcome that feels natural, strategic power, is invisible. To those who do not understand it, it is subtle, quiet, and deeply psychological. It works not by breaking people, by guiding them into predictable behavior. This part of the book reveals how Machiavellian minds structure situations, relationships, and dynamics in ways that create advantage, not so you can do this, but so you can recognize it instantly and never fall into someone else's constructed reality. Understanding. Strategy is what makes you immune to it. The first strategy. Position before CTOA. Most people act first and think later. They speak without considering consequences. They confront without preparing. They choose without evaluating leverage. They rush into decisions because emotion pushes them. Forward. Machiavellian thinkers never act before positioning. They do not confront until the situation favors them. They do not speak until the environment benefits their words. They do not reveal their beliefs until the social climate aligns with them. They do not make demands until leverage already exists. This is why their moves appear effortless. They wait until the position is strong enough that effort becomes unnecessary. People who don't understand this mistake patience for passivity. Machiavellian patience is not stillness. It is preparation. Strategic advantage begins with waiting for the right moment. The second. Strategy. Information, as POWR information, is the currency of influence. Not secrets patterns. Not gossip understanding. Not spying listening. A Machiavellian thinker gathers information quietly. They learn what people fear, what motivates them, what embarrasses them, what angers them, what inspires them, what reassures them. Not to control them, but to understand the terrain information reveals. Where resistance is where leverage exists, where vulnerability hides, where opportunities emerge, where boundaries lie. Information is not used to manipulate. It is used to frame situations in ways that benefit the strategist. But if you understand this, you can guard your information, control your disclosures, and prevent others from gaining unearned influence over your inner world. The third strategy, silence as a strategic PR. Almost people fear silence. They rush to fill it. They talk to avoid awkwardness. They reveal too much too quickly. They speak without thinking. Machiavellian thinkers understand that silence shifts power. Silence forces others to reveal themselves. Silence makes people uncomfortable enough to talk more than they should. Silence creates psychological imbalance. Silence is not emptiness, it is a mirror. It exposes insecurity. It exposes impatience. It exposes anxiety. When someone remains silent, the other person feels compelled to fill the space. In filling that space, they expose their intentions, emotions, and weaknesses. Silence is not manipulation, it's clarity. Learn to sit in silence, and you prevent others from using it against you. The fourth strategy. The power of not reictang. People reveal their weakness through reaction. Emotion exposes vulnerability. Anger reveals insecurity. Over-explanation reveals guilt. Defensiveness reveals fear. Impatience reveals desperation. Machiavellian. Thinkers understand that the one who reacts first loses control. Thus, they remain composed even when pressured, still even when provoked, unmoved even when insulted. This is not emotional coldness. It is strategic emotional discipline. Because when you do not react, the manipulator cannot read you, cannot predict you, cannot influence you. Calmness is not passivity. Calmness is dominance. Your lack of reaction creates unpredictability, and unpredictability is power. The fifth strategy. Indirect influence. Machiavellian minds do not attack directly. Direct conflict creates resistance. Direct demands trigger defiance. Direct arguments escalate tension. Instead, they use indirect influence. They guide decisions, not force them. They shape perception, not argue about it. They alter context, not confront behavior. Indirect influence works because people do not feel controlled. They feel inspired. Recognizing indirect influence allows you to detect subtle attempts at shaping your choices. When an outcome seems like it was your idea, ask yourself, Was the environment structured to make this choice feel natural? Awareness breaks indirect influence instantly. The sixth strategy? Controlled emotional expression. Machiavellian thinkers express emotions strategically, not excessively, not impulsively, not honestly, strategically. They know when to appear sad, calm, amused, helpful, frustrated, confused, distant, each emotion chosen for effect. Their emotional expression is intentional, not reactive. But here is the key insight. They can only use emotional performance effectively if others do not understand their own emotions. If you understand your emotions, if you do not fear them, if you do not hide from them, if you do not let them overwhelm you, then no one can use emotions to influence your behavior. Emotional self-awareness is the antidote to emotional strategy. The seventh strategy. Pattern RSEOGO in strategic individuals notice patterns others miss. How someone responds under stress, how they behave when ignored, how they react to praise, how they shift when insecure, how they lie, how they distort, how they justify, how they apologize, how they blame. Pattern recognition allows them to anticipate behavior, almost like seeing the future. But if you master pattern recognition, no one becomes intimidating. People become predictable, and predictable people cannot manipulate you. When patterns are visible, influence fails. Clarity destroys control. The eighth strategy. Multiple options, never. Machiavellian thinkers never limit themselves to one path. They always prepare alternatives. They always create backup plans. They always ensure they have options. Why? Because the person with more options always holds more power. People feel trapped when they have only one choice. People feel pressured when they have no alternatives. People feel controlled when they cannot walk away. If you want immunity from manipulation, cultivate options. When you have multiple choices, you cannot be coerced. You cannot be rushed. You cannot be pressured. You cannot be controlled. Choice is power. Lack of choice is vulnerability. The ninth strategy. Context, MAON, TON influence. It's not only about what is said, it is about where. When and how it is said. A Machiavellian thinker understands that a truth delivered at the wrong moment becomes useless. A lie delivered at the right moment becomes believable. A request made in private feels different from a request made in public. A comment made during stress carries more weight than one made in peace. They do not rely on words alone. They rely on context. But once you learn to examine context, once you stop focusing only on content, the invisible architecture of influence becomes clear, and when something is seen, it loses power. The 10th strategy. Control of PRCEPTO in strategic individuals. Understand that real power comes from how others perceive you. If people see you as weak, you will be treated as weak. If they see you as strong, you will be treated as strong. If they see you as confident, they will respect you. If they see you as insecure, they will test you. Manipulators shape perception carefully. Through behavior, through silence, through posture, through tone, through selective disclosure, through strategic vulnerability. They do not need to be powerful. They only need to appear powerful. But here is the defense. If you control how you present yourself, not through manipulation, but through self-awareness and boundaries, you prevent others from positioning you. Identity becomes your shield. The 11th strategy. Aiming for long-term ADVA and TIG, most people chase short-term satisfaction. Strategic minds chase long-term position. They do not seek immediate victory. They seek sustainable leverage. They do not chase fast wins. They build slow advantage. They do not need to win every argument. They only need to create an environment where they cannot lose future ones. Long-term thinking is rare. This rarity is what makes it powerful. But if you adopt long-term thinking, manipulators lose their advantage. Because they rely on your short-term emotional impulses, long-term clarity defeats short-term tactics. The 12th strategy. Neutrality as a Sachil de Machiavellian. Thinkers rarely reveal their emotions or opinions fully. They stay neutral. They stay unreadable. They stay undefined. Why? Because the less people know, the less people can target. If someone does not know what you fear, they cannot threaten you. If someone does not know what you want, they cannot tempt you. If someone does not know your boundaries, they cannot violate them. Neutrality is not deception, it is protection. Maintaining privacy is not manipulation, it is self-preservation. Once you learn this, you stop oversharing, you stop revealing your insecurities, you stop handing people emotional ammunition, and instantly you become harder to control. Most people imagine manipulation as an obvious act, something dramatic, violent, or overtly threatening. But the most effective tactics used by Machiavellian minds are not extreme. They are subtle, smooth, quiet, invisible to anyone who isn't trained to see them. These are the shadow strategist techniques powerful individuals use without raising suspicion, without creating resistance, and often without the target ever realizing what happened. These tactics are dangerous not because they are evil, but because they are unseen. And anything unseen can influence you before you have the chance to defend yourself. But once you understand these tactics, you strip them of their power. Awareness dissolves manipulation. Recognition creates immunity. Clarity ends confusion. This chapter reveals the silent tools, the psychological shadows that Machiavellian individuals use to gain influence without force, without confrontation, often without speaking a word. The first shadow strategy, the foot in the door EFFI, CTS tactic, is as old as human psychology. It begins with a small request, insignificant, harmless, easy to accept. Then slowly, gradually, consistently, the requests escalate. You agree because you already agreed to the first one. Your mind wants consistency. Your identity wants alignment. Your self-image wants integrity. Machiavellian minds understand this flaw in human psychology. They never ask for what they truly want first. They ask for the smallest step, the smallest commitment, the smallest shift, and once you take that step, the next step feels natural. This is how influence becomes habit. This is how control becomes disguised as cooperation. This is how someone leads you into a decision that feels like your own. The second shadow strategy, the DORNTFETECHN ethos. Strategy is the opposite. Ask for something huge, something you know will be rejected. Then follow it with a smaller request. The smaller request feels reasonable. It feels fair. It feels like compromise. But the smaller request was the real goal all along. Rejection softens resistance. Rejection creates guilt. Rejection makes people want to be fair. A Machiavellian thinker uses this technique to gain concessions, reduce your standards, shift the negotiation, make you more agreeable. Tactic is subtle and devastatingly effective. The third shadow strategy, gaslighting, is not yelling. Gaslighting is not insulting. Gaslighting is not aggression. Gaslighting is rewriting your perception of reality slowly, subtly, methodically. It sounds like, that didn't happen. You're remembering wrong. You're too sensitive. Everyone thinks you're overreacting. You're imagining things. The purpose is not to confuse you it is to make you doubt your own mind. A person who doubts their perception becomes dependent on the manipulator's version of reality. But once you recognize gaslighting, it loses all effect. It becomes noise. It becomes comedy. It becomes powerless. Awareness is the antidote to gaslighting. The fourth shadow strategy, TRANGU, UN triangulation. It's when someone creates a psychological triangle instead of resolving issues directly. They bring in a third person, real or imaginary, to gain leverage. They say things like, everyone agrees with me. Other people also noticed what you did. Someone else thinks you're wrong. I talked to someone, and they said the same thing. This tactic activates social pressure, insecurity, and fear of judgment. Triangulation is used to shame you, destabilize you, isolate you, manipulate. Your perception control your behavior when someone brings in a third party instead of speaking directly. You're not in a conversation, you're in a psychological trap. The fifth shadow strategy, intermittent REI, inaphors, enmity. This is the most addictive psychological pattern in human behavior. The manipulator gives attention, affection, approval, or validation. Sometimes, not always, not consistently, not predictably. Just enough to keep you emotionally hooked. This is the same pattern slot machines use. Unpredictable reward creates the strongest addiction. Machiavellian individuals use this to create emotional dependence, obsessive thinking, insecurity, confusion, attachment. You don't stay because of the pain. You stay because of the occasional relief. Recognizing this pattern frees you permanently. The sixth shadow strategy. RRNG mirroring builds trust faster than anything else. A manipulator mirrors your values, tone, interests, wounds, dreams. Fears, opinions, communication style. This creates an illusion. You're just like me. You understand me. You get it. No one else feels this way. But mirroring is not connection. It is strategy. A person who feels understood becomes vulnerable. A person who feels seen becomes open. A person who feels matched becomes attached. Once you recognize mirroring, rapport loses its magic. The seventh shadow strategy, negging, is low-level criticism disguised as humor, sarcasm, or honesty. It sounds like you're cute, but you'd be hotter if you tried harder. That idea is okay, I guess. You're smart, but you overthink too much. Relax, it was just a joke. Negging destabilizes self-confidence. It makes you seek the manipulator's approval, creates hierarchy. A destabilized person becomes easier to influence. Negging is not teasing. Negging is psychological positioning. But once you spot it, the spell breaks instantly. The eighth shadow strategy, framing and REFREI, mind G-framing, is the art of controlling the narrative without changing the facts. A manipulator reframes situations to make themselves appear reasonable, calm, logical, innocent, superior, and reframes you as irrational, emotional, guilty, dramatic, confused with framing. Reality becomes irrelevant. Perception becomes everything. But once you recognize a frame, you can break it simply by naming it. Awareness dissolves narrative control. The ninth shadow strategy. The pity PLAY manipulators weaponize vulnerability. They cry, they tremble, they break down. They collapse emotionally. They act wounded. They portray themselves as the victim. This creates guilt. Guilt creates compliance. Compliance creates control. Many toxic individuals cry not from pain, but from strategy. But if you notice the pattern, the tears lose their power. The 10th shadow strategy, PROJCTO in projection. It's when someone accuses you of the thing they are guilty of. A liar calls you dishonest. A manipulator calls you manipulative. A selfish person calls you selfish. A cheater accuses you of cheating. Projection shifts attention away from the truth. It destabilizes your sense of self. It puts you on the defensive. But once you recognize projection, the attack becomes confession. The 11th shadow strategy, overwhelming you with LOGIC. This is known as word salad, intellectual fog, or semantic overload. The manipulator talks endlessly, over-explains, brings irrelevant details, twists language, misinterprets your points, floods you with arguments, reframes, multiple times in one conversation. This tactic exhausts your mind. Once you're tired enough, you agree just to escape. This is not debate, it is domination through confusion. The defense, silence, distance, and refusing to engage with nonsense. The 12th shadow strategy, BITN baiting, is when someone provokes you intentionally to make you react emotionally. It often looks like subtle disrespect, insults masked as humor. Unnecessary comparisons, bringing up sensitive topics, questioning your intelligence, poking at your insecurities. They want you to explode. Your explosion becomes their justification. Your reaction becomes their evidence. Recognizing bait turns the trap into comedy. The 13th, shadow strategy. Manipulating team. A manipulator controls timing, responding late, replying instantly, disappearing. When needed, showing up suddenly. Pushing urgency, delaying resolution. Timing isn't random. It is engineered to control your emotions. Fast replies feel validating. Slow replies feel punishing. Silence creates anxiety. Urgency triggers compliance. But once you see the pattern, timing loses its power. The 14th shadow strategy. Selective memoir. Why manipulators forget strategically. They forget what hurts them. They forget what benefits you. They forget promises. They forget your sacrifices. They forget agreements. They forget the parts of the story that incriminate them. Their memory is not broken, is selective. They remember what gives them power and forget what gives you clarity. Recognize selective memory, and their narrative collapses. The 15th shadow strategy. Relentless AGR. I am. And this one seems harmless, but it's not. A manipulator agrees with everything. You're right, absolutely. Feel the same. You're so smart. Exactly my thoughts. Agreement is not connection. Agreement is seduction. It lowers your defenses, creates safety, builds trust. Then once you're convinced they are on your side, they pivot and exploit the very trust they engineered. Agreement is camouflage. The 16th shadow strategy. False choices. Manipulators give you two options, both benefiting them. It looks like freedom. It feels like choice. But it's a cage disguised as autonomy. Examples. Do you want to apologize? Now or later? Should we fix this my way or the other way I suggested? Do you want to stay calm or make things worse? Choice becomes illusion. But once you see the illusion, you walk around the trap. The 17th shadow strategy. Energy. DRA and INGs. Some people don't manipulate you with arguments. They manipulate you with exhaustion. They drain your emotional energy until you stop resisting. You stop thinking, you stop caring, you stop defending yourself, you accept their narrative, you comply to end the conflict, but once you recognize energy draining, you disengage. Distance is your shield. Silence is your weapon. Indifference is your defense. There comes a point in every person's life when they must decide what kind of mind they want to walk the world with. A mind that is easily influenced, easily shaken, easily shaped by the intentions of others. Or a mind that is fortified, disciplined, perceptive, and unmovable. Most people live with the first mind not because they are weak, but because they were never taught how to defend themselves psychologically. Schools do not teach you how to protect your emotional boundaries. Parents do not teach you how to recognize manipulation. Society does not teach you how to guard your identity. People are taught to be polite, not perceptive. People are taught to be agreeable, not analytical. People are taught to avoid conflict, not protect themselves. This is why manipulators thrive, not because they are strong, but because most people were never trained to see the game they're walking into. This part of the book is where that ends. This is the chapter where you learn the foundations of psychological immunity, not paranoia, not coldness, not distrust, but awareness, clarity, self-mastery, and mental sovereignty. Because the goal is not to fear manipulators. The goal is to be unaffected by them. You do not need to out-manipulate anyone. You simply need to stop being manipulable. And that begins with understanding the first, most essential truth. Manipulation only works when you have unprotected emotional territory. A fortified mind cannot be coerced. A self-aware mind cannot be misled. A self-respecting mind cannot be guilted. A boundary-driven mind cannot be exploited. Psychological defense is not about becoming harder. It is about becoming clearer. The first defense. Know your emotional pattern. Cannot defend your mind if you don't understand what moves it. Every person has emotional triggers. Moments where logic collapses and emotion takes control. These triggers often come from childhood wounds, unmet needs, unresolved fears, or attachment habits. Manipulators don't create your triggers. They simply activate them. This is why emotional self-awareness is your first shield. You must know What angers you? What flatters you? What embarrasses you? What intimidates you? What makes you insecure? What makes you feel guilty? What makes you feel responsible for others? What makes you chase validation? What makes you fear loss when you know your triggers, you control them? When you don't, someone else will. Emotional awareness is not soft. It is strategic armor. The second defense. Never seek approval. Approval is the easiest pathway into the mind. Manipulators do not push, they praise. They do not attack, they validate. They do not threaten, they flatter. Why? Because people who crave approval become predictable. If someone knows what type of praise you respond to, they can guide your behavior without force. The antidote is not coldness. The antidote is self-sufficiency. When your self-worth comes from within, external approval becomes irrelevant. And when approval loses value, manipulation loses leverage. The third defense. Set boundaries without expla, and most people fail to protect themselves because they think boundaries require justification. They explain. They defend. They rationalize. They negotiate. And in doing so, they surrender power. A boundary is not a negotiation. A boundary is a fact. If you explain your boundary, a manipulator will try to attack your explanation if you defend it. They will try to undermine your defense if you soften it. They will test its limits. But when you state your boundary clearly, calmly, and without apology, the dynamic shifts instantly. A person who respects boundaries stays. A person who manipulates flees. And this is how boundaries become filters, separating healthy people from dangerous people. The fourth defense. Stay neutral under PRSSUR. Manipulators thrive on emotional reactions. Reactions reveal weaknesses. Reactions reveal insecurities. Reactions reveal attachment. Reactions reveal leverage. When you react, you expose your psyche. When you stay calm, you conceal it. Neutrality is not indifference. Neutrality is control. When someone tries to provoke you, and you remain composed, their tactic fails immediately. They lose their map. They lose their access point. They lose their advantage. Neutrality forces manipulators into guessing, and guessing destroys their strategy. The calm mind is the undefeated mind. The fifth defense. Master the art of silence. Silence is one of the most powerful defensive weapons. It disrupts manipulation instantly. When you remain silent, the manipulator over-explains. They reveal their motive. They expose their strategy. They become emotionally uncomfortable. They lose rhythm. They lose psychological grip. Silence reveals more truth than arguments ever will. You may think responding shows strength, but in psychological warfare, silence is often the strongest move. Not every attack deserves a counterattack. Some deserve emptiness. Silence is the mirror that exposes the manipulator's reflection. The sixth defense. Never argue with someone who is a CTING. Manipulators do not express emotions, they perform them. You cannot reason with a performance. You cannot negotiate with an act. You cannot fix a script. A manipulator's anger is not anger. It is strategy. A manipulator's tears are not sadness. They are leverage. A manipulator's panic is not fear. It is bait. Arguing with an actor only gives them more material to work with when someone is performing. Your best defense is disengagement, not confrontation, not analysis, not debate, just withdrawal of attention. The performance collapses when the audience leaves. The seventh defense. Guard your personal information. A manipulator cannot influence you without data. Your secrets are not just stories, they are psychological weapons. People reveal too much too soon. They overshare. They unpack childhood trauma. They confess insecurities. They express fears. They reveal weaknesses. They disclose desires. They expose their emotional architecture, not because they trust the person, because they crave connection. But true connection is not built through vulnerability. It is built through consistency. Never reveal what you don't know how to defend. Never reveal what someone may weaponize. Privacy is not secrecy. Privacy is self-preservation. A mystery cannot be manipulated. The eighth defense. Stop trying to fix POP. Many victims of manipulation fall into the trap of believing they can heal or repair someone who is broken, toxic, or self-destructive. This impulse is noble, but dangerous. You cannot fix someone who benefits from their behavior. You cannot save someone who uses their wounds strategically. You cannot heal someone whose power comes from being broken. You cannot repair someone who manipulates sympathy. You cannot rescue someone who refuses growth. The belief that you can save someone is the doorway manipulators walk through. Your strength becomes the tool they use against you. The antidote is simple. Empathy without responsibility. You can care, but you cannot carry. The ninth defense. Trust patterns, not WRD's words lie. Patterns don't. Manipulators are skilled speakers. They know how to promise, persuade, apologize, perform, and reframe, but their patterns always reveal the truth. A pattern is what someone repeatedly does what? They avoid what they prioritize, what they dismiss, how they respond to conflict, how they act when unobserved, how they treat boundaries, how they handle power, how they handle your emotions, the most powerful. Defense is perceptive observation. Watch what a person consistently does, not what they temporarily say. A manipulator may speak like an angel, but their patterns always betray them. The 10th defense. Never fear losing PO. Purely fear of loss is the chain that binds you to manipulation. Manipulators leverage abandonment, withdrawal, and rejection to create emotional control. When someone knows you fear losing them, your boundaries collapse. Your self-respect dissolves. Your standards evaporate. Your judgment becomes clouded. The strongest psychological defense in the world is this: I would rather lose you than lose myself. When you stop fearing loss, you stop accepting disrespect. You stop tolerating manipulation. You stop compromising your values. You stop abandoning your identity. You stop participating in your own destruction. A person who is not afraid to walk away cannot be controlled. The 11th defense. Recognize manipulation. EARLY. Manipulation is easiest to resist at the beginning. It becomes harder once emotional attachment forms. Early detection gives you freedom. Late detection gives you trauma. Look for inconsistency, excessive charm, strategic emotion, guilt tripping, subtle disrespect, boundary testing, shifting narratives, unpredictable, affection, emotional withholding, excessive flattery, triangulation, selective memory. You cannot stop manipulation. You refuse to see awareness is not paranoia. Awareness is maturity. The 12th defense. Build an unbreakable self-imageth. Final and most powerful psychological defense is unshakable identity. Manipulators only succeed when you doubt yourself. They only succeed when you are uncertain. They only succeed when you allow them to define you. But when your identity is self-created, not dependent on validation, not fragile under pressure, not shaped by approval, not influenced by guilt, not weakened by insecurity, you become impossible to manipulate. Identity is the ultimate shield. It is the core of psychological sovereignty. When you know who you are, no one else can tell you who to be. There is a question every powerful person must eventually answer: what kind of power am I willing to use? Because power itself is neutral. It is neither pure nor corrupt, neither good nor evil. It is simply influence, the ability to shape outcomes, guide behavior, and impact the world. But the use of power is what defines its morality. Some people use power to control. Some use power to uplift. Some use power to manipulate. Some use power to defend. Some use power to dominate. Some use power to protect. Some use power to feed their ego. Some use power to protect their peace. A Machiavellian mind understands influence deeply. But understanding influence does not force you into darkness. Knowledge of manipulation does not make you a manipulator. Awareness of tactics does not turn you into a predator. It makes you conscious. It makes you precise. It makes you unmanipulable. It makes you capable. The purpose of this book is not to corrupt your mind. The purpose is to free it, to show you what exists in the world, so you can navigate it without being consumed by it. This chapter is the turning point. This is where you learn how to use influence ethically, intelligently, and responsibly, not to control people, but to protect yourself, to communicate effectively, to navigate complex personalities, to maintain boundaries, to command respect, to lead with strength, to avoid becoming prey, and to avoid becoming a predator. Ethical power is not weakness. It is strength with discipline. It is influence with integrity. It is clarity without cruelty. True power is not the ability to manipulate others. True power is the ability to navigate manipulation without losing yourself. The first principle of ethical power: control yourself. Phi in ethical power tries to control others. Ethical power controls the self. Most people attempt to influence the world while their own emotions remain chaotic. They try to lead others while they cannot lead themselves. They try to persuade others while they are icily manipulated. They try to command respect while they cannot regulate their own reactions. Self-control is the foundation of ethical influence. How can you protect yourself from manipulation if you cannot control your anger? If you cannot control your need for approval? If you cannot regulate your impulses? If you cannot resist emotional bait? Ethical power begins with mastery. Master your emotion. Master your patterns. Master your attention. Master your reactions. Master your weaknesses. The person who masters themselves does not need to manipulate others, because internal order automatically creates external influence. The second principle of ethical power: speak with intention, not IMPLSC. Manipulators speak strategically. Most people speak emotionally. This is why manipulation works. The manipulator is intentional, while the target is reactive. But ethical influence uses intention not to trick others, but to communicate with clarity and strength. Intentional speech means you think before responding. Choose words that reflect truth, not fear. Avoid emotional exaggeration. Do not speak to win, but to express. Use silence as a boundary. Refuse to escalate conflict. Stop apologizing for existing. Stop explaining what doesn't need explanation. Stop speaking to be liked. Intentional speech is powerful because it is clean. It is direct. It is self-respecting. It cannot be twisted. It cannot be weaponized. A manipulator uses words to control others. An ethical mind uses words to clarify, not control. The third principle of ethical power: become. Non-reactive thinking protects you more from manipulation than emotional non-reactivity. This does not mean coldness. This does not mean apathy. This does not mean shutting down. It means you feel emotion without acting impulsively. You respond. Instead of react, you choose strategy over instinct. You understand your triggers. You don't collapse under pressure. You don't rise into anger when baited. You don't fall into guilt when pushed. Manipulators rely on your reaction. Your reaction gives them power. Your reaction reveals your mind. When you remain stable, calm, neutral, present, manipulators lose every advantage. Ethical power is calm power, because calmness is not compliance. Calmness is control. The fourth principle of ethical power: set boundaries without being cruel. Boundaries are not walls. They're instructions for how to treat you. Weak people avoid setting boundaries. Manipulative people weaponize boundaries. Ethical people set boundaries with clarity, firmness, and respect. Ethical boundaries sound like, I don't tolerate that. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. I choose not to participate. That's not acceptable. I'm going to stop the conversation here. I won't continue if there's disrespect. No. Boundaries are not hostility. Boundaries are protection. People who want access to you will test your boundaries. People who want control over you will attack your boundaries. People who respect you will honor your boundaries. Boundaries reveal character faster than words ever. Will, ethical power is the courage to protect your peace without harming others. The fifth principle of ethical power. Recognize intent. Respond to PATTE, or most people respond to words. Ethical power responds only to patterns. Manipulators say anything. Their talk is cheap. Their words are tools. Patterns reveal truth. If someone lies once, you pay attention. If they lie twice, you remember. If they lie 3 times, you adjust the relationship permanently. The ethical person does not punish. They simply align themselves with reality. Patterns tell you who can be trusted, who is dangerous, who is unstable, who is manipulative, who is inconsistent, who is genuine. Who is safe, who should be removed. Responding to patterns is not manipulation. It is maturity. It is the difference between falling for illusions and seeing people as they truly are. The sixth principle of ethical power. Limit access to your inner world. The most powerful defense you have is emotional privacy, not secrecy, privacy. There is a difference. Secrecy hides. Privacy protects. Manipulators need emotional access to influence you. They need your fears. They need your hopes. They need your insecurities. They need your wounds. They need your history. They need your dreams. If they don't know your emotional map, they can't navigate it. Ethical power means choosing who earns access to your inner world. You do not overshare. You do not confess prematurely. You do not reveal vulnerabilities to untested people. You do not give manipulators the tools to control you. Your heart is not a public library. Your mind is not open territory. Ethical power is emotional sovereignty. The seventh principle of ethical power. Never use someone's weakness against them. This is the difference between the dark path and the ethical path. Machiavellian manipulators exploit insecurities. Ethical individuals protect them. A manipulator weaponizes your vulnerability. A leader safeguards it. A predator uses your weakness. A protector shields it, knowing someone's emotional weak. Points gives you power, but how you use that power defines your character. Ethical power involves discipline. You do not guilt people. You do not shame people. You do not humiliate people. You do not manipulate fears. You do not trigger insecurity. You do not exploit confusion. You do not sabotage confidence. Your integrity defines your influence. Ethical power does not require dominance. It requires responsibility. The eighth principle of ethical power. Walk away without. Violent Scytha, strongest people do not win battles, they avoid battles that are beneath them. Manipulators escalate. They provoke. They demand attention. They feed on emotional chaos. Walking away is not weakness. Walking away is mastery. Walking away means you refuse to play psychological games. You refuse to engage with toxic behavior. You refuse to negotiate with manipulation. You refuse to drain your energy. You refuse to stay where you are not. Respected walking away is the ethical way of saying, you cannot control me. You cannot access me. You cannot define my reality. You cannot shape my identity. The manipulator loses their power the moment you stop participating. Ethical power does not require destruction. It simply requires departure. The ninth principle of ethical power. Don't fight. OWGROW. Manipulators want to fight. They want drama. They want an emotional reaction. They want chaos. They want you to collapse into the same level of instability they live in. Ethical power refuses to descend. You don't fight darkness by becoming darker. You outgrow it. You rise. You evolve. You transform. You walk into clarity. You walk into strength. You walk into self-respect. You walk into maturity. The manipulator loses because growth leaves them behind. Outgrowing someone is the most powerful ending because it requires no words. No revenge, no theatrics, just transformation. The 10th principle of ethical power: lead with stability. Not dominance an ethical influence relies on. Fear, intimidation, confusion, guilt, seduction, emotional chaos, ethical influence relies on. Consistency, clarity, fairness, confidence, emotional discipline, calmness, integrity. People trust stability. People respect calmness. People admire consistency. You do not need to dominate others when you radiate emotional. Self-control. You become a psychological anchor, not a puppet master. Ethical power is stronger than manipulative power because it does not collapse under its own weight. It builds trust. It maintains respect. It creates loyalty naturally. It inspires without force. Manipulation creates compliance. Ethical influence creates commitment. One is fragile. One is sustainable. There is a moment in every person's journey when the world stops being confusing, chaotic, unpredictable, and overwhelming. A moment where everything that once felt threatening becomes visible, clear, and powerless. For some, this moment never arrives. They live their entire lives reacting to the world instead of shaping their place inside it. They remain emotionally exposed, mentally undefended, psychologically unprepared. But for others, for those who consciously step into awareness, this moment changes everything. It is the birth of mental sovereignty. Mental sovereignty is the quiet, unwavering strength of a person who has mastered themselves, a person who cannot be manipulated, a person who cannot be provoked, a person who cannot be confused, a person who cannot be destabilized, a person who cannot be pushed into emotional chaos, a person who cannot be controlled by fear, guilt, shame, or illusion. This chapter is the culmination of everything you have learned. It is the final layer, the construction of a mind that stands above influence. Not by dominating others, not by controlling others, not by manipulating others, but by becoming someone whose psychological foundation is so powerful, so stable, so grounded, so self-directed, that manipulation cannot enter. This is the making of an unshakable mind. The first pillar of mind mastery, emotional autonomous. Mind does not outsource its emotional state. Most people allow their emotions to be shaped by approval, rejection, abandonment, attention, silence, pressure, guilt, expectation. They do not control their emotions control them. Manipulators exploit this fragility effortlessly. But a person who masters their mind does not allow external forces to control their internal world. Emotional autonomy means you regulate yourself, you calm yourself, you validate yourself, you reassure yourself, you guide your own thoughts, you decide how to feel instead of reacting automatically. This does not mean eliminating emotion, it means governing emotion. An emotionally autonomous person is immune to psychological bait. Their calmness is not an act, it is their nature. And someone who cannot be emotionally triggered cannot be psychologically controlled. The second pillar of mind, history, identity. CLORDYU cannot be manipulated if you do not allow others to define who you are. Manipulators attack identity. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. You're the problem. You're insecure. You're imagining things. You never. These statements work only when the target lacks identity clarity. Identity clarity means, who you are, what you believe, what you value, what you stand for, what you tolerate, what you reject, what you deserve, what you want when. You have identity clarity. Someone else's accusation or projection cannot enter your mind. They can try to distort your self-image, but their words bounce against a solid internal structure. Identity clarity is psychological armor. The third pillar of mind mastery, self-validation. Manipulats rely on your need for validation. They can approve you or reject you, they gain leverage. But validation dependence is a self-inflicted wound. It forms when your worth is externally sourced. Self-validation ends that dependency permanently. Self-validation means you approve of yourself, you trust your own standards, you value your own opinion, You do not chase reassurance. You do not crumble under criticism. You do not fall apart when someone withdraws validation is not arrogance. It is internal stability. When you validate yourself, manipulators lose the power to reward or punish you. Their approval becomes irrelevant. Their disapproval loses its sting. Their silence becomes meaningless. Self-validation is freedom. The fourth pillar of mind mastery. High psychological bounda. Ours boundaries are not rules for others. They are instructions for yourself. Most people think boundaries mean, don't do this to me. But true boundaries mean, if you do this, I will remove myself. Boundaries are not a request. They are a structure. High boundary individuals understand this deeply. They protect their energy. They protect their time. They protect their peace. They protect their self-respect. They do not tolerate manipulation. They do not negotiate with disrespect. They do not remain in toxic dynamics. They do not enable emotional predators. A boundary is a mirror that shows others how seriously you take yourself. A manipulator cannot influence someone whose boundaries are unshakable. The fifth pillar of mind mastery. Strategic THS and mind test. Strategic detachment is not indifference. It is perspective. It means you can step back emotionally and evaluate a situation without being consumed by it. Manipulators depend on your emotional entanglement. They need you invested, attached, fearful, reactive, hopeful, confused, attached to the outcome, attached to them. Detachment breaks this cycle. When you detach, you see motives, clearly you. Assess patterns logically. You stop personalizing attacks. You stop absorbing negative emotion. You stop internalizing guilt. You stop falling for emotional bait. You stop reacting impulsively. Detachment gives you oxygen. It gives you clarity. It gives you distance. And distance is the death of manipulation. The sixth pillar of mind mastery. Non-negotiable self-respect is the foundation that all psychological defense stands on. Manipulators test your self-respect constantly, through disrespect, through blame, through guilt, through silence, through pressure, through boundary pushing, through inconsistency. If you allow it once, you teach them that you can be trained. If you allow it twice, you teach them you lack standards. If you allow it repeatedly, you teach them they can shape your reality. But when your self-respect is non-negotiable, you do not tolerate mistreatment under any circumstance. Self-respect ends manipulation before it begins. The seventh pillar of mind mastery. Pattern RACOIN. People lie with words. They lie with tone. They lie with emotion. They lie with tears. They lie with apologies. But patterns do not lie. Patterns are the most honest thing about a human being. When you recognize patterns, you see the truth directly. If someone always blames others, gives pattern. If someone avoids accountability, gives pattern. If someone tests boundaries, repeatedly gives pattern. If someone uses guilt to control, gives pattern. If someone shifts between charm and distance, gives pattern. If someone lies casually, gives pattern. Patterns expose the entire psychology. Manipulators thrive on the hope that you won't look closely. Once you do, the illusion collapses. Pattern recognition transforms uncertainty into certainty, and certainty destroys manipulation. The eighth pillar of mind mastery, emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety means your emotions do not intoxicate your judgment. Most people lose clarity because emotion blurs perception. They confuse desire with compatibility. They confuse attraction with trust. They confuse hope with reality. They confuse fear with intuition. They confuse chaos with passion. Manipulators exploit emotional intoxication. Emotional sobriety means you feel emotion, you acknowledge emotion. But you do not obey emotion. You pause before reacting. You breathe before responding. You question before deciding. You observe before engaging. A sober mind cannot be seduced into psychological traps. Emotional sobriety produces clarity, and clarity repels manipulation. The ninth pillar of mind mastery. accepting what people show, why you want to. The greatest weaknesses in human psychology is the refusal to accept reality when it contradicts desire. Most people cling to potential. They cling to apologies. They cling to excuses. They cling to hope. They cling to fantasies. Manipulators rely on this refusal to master your mind. You must develop one of the strongest abilities a human can possess: accept people as they are, not as you want them to be. This doesn't mean becoming cynical. It means becoming accurate. Accepting what someone shows you saves you from years of manipulation. Denial sustains manipulation. Acceptance ends it. The 10th pillar of mind mastery, the power of walking. AWAY manipulators lose their power the moment you stop fearing their loss. Walking away is the ultimate psychological position. It communicates. You cannot be controlled. You cannot be intimidated. You cannot be guilted. You cannot be shaped by their tactics. You cannot be kept through fear. You cannot be manipulated. Walking away is not punishment. It is protection. It is clarity. It is self-respect in motion. The person who can walk away holds the strongest power in any dynamic, not because they don't care, but because they refuse to abandon themselves. The 11th pillar of mind mastery, mental independence, is the final stage. It means you think for yourself, decide for yourself, evaluate for yourself, believe in your own intuition, trust your perception, choose your reality, live by your principles, follow your boundaries. Manipulators fail because they cannot penetrate a mind that stands on its own foundation. A mentally independent person is difficult to influence, is impossible to destabilize, is immune to psychological tactics, is unattracted to toxic people, is uninterested in emotional chaos, is incapable of being controlled.